So, good afternoon. My name is Milton Grannum, and we're here with Mr. Shamar Gallaway, who is a teacher by profession. He is pretty young. He recently turned 20, and he teaches at Queen's College. He's been teaching there for 3 years now, and he would describe himself as a nature guy. He said he likes everything nature-wise. So, this afternoon, we're talking about sexual violence amongst boys. And this topic came up because of Blue Umbrella Day, which aims to address the issue of sexual violence affecting boys and to improve support for those who have been affected by sexual violence already. So to get into our discussion for today, Mr. Dowling, our first question would be, what is your understanding of sexual violence? And it doesn't have to be specifically for boys, but general. What is your understanding of that term?
All right. First, thanks for the great introduction, by the way, and great question to start off our discussion. So I believe everyone they have general understanding of what sexual abuse is, but I think for me personally, if I'm to define it or describe it or to say what I understand of it, I think sexual abuse just entails any form of sexual misconduct or any form of sexual act that is unsolicited.
Mhm.
It's done in a manner that is unconsensual and it's unwanted. That's the
Mhm.
best way that I would describe sexual abuse.
Right.
Yeah.
And it corresponds with my understanding also. So I think you're on the right track. I know you're on the right track.
Awesome.
Now, sexual abuse, as we would look at it, or as we know, is usually overlooked, especially amongst boys. It's usually
Correct.
overlooked and underreported because boys would think that, especially if it's a female, they would think that it's something right to be abused by a female. Even if it's a male that's being abused by, it's not usually reported because they might be deemed as too weak or, you know. So, what advice would you give to boys who have been victims of sexual abuse?
Okay. All right. Great question as well. So I think what I would say to any of the boys that I know or perhaps would encounter if they disclose to me that they're a victim of sexual abuse, I think it would be to let them know that first it gets better. But for it to get better, you need to acknowledge that what was done to you was wrong, because we do, as you mentioned prior, it is a very taboo thing, especially with regards to boys and men as well.
Mhm.
To even acknowledge that they were abused in a sexual manner because of how emasculating that 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 acknowledgement can be. So I
Mhm.
think trying my best to get them to a point where they acknowledge what was done to them and also reinforcing the narrative in their mind that it will get better in
Right.
time, but it requires intentionality to get better. You
Right.
need to actually want to get better and do what needs to be done to heal and well to process the trauma and then heal from it.
Yeah. So coming out of that, speaking out would definitely be something advice because if they don't speak out, then no one would know what's happening. And speaking out would mean speaking to someone that you trust and someone who can offer help.
I
Now,
I I concur.
go ahead. Right. As a teacher, you usually come into contact with students every day. Have
Yes.
you ever had a student report a case of sexual violence to you?
I actually have. It happened when I was a class teacher once, and it was honestly quite an unexpected disclosure, if I'm being honest. And I think in many cases, when abuse is reported, it's always it every well, the majority of people they have this same sentiments that, oh, I never expected this. And then
Right.
it really puts into perspective how ignorant a lot of us are, because why is it that we never expect any of these things, or
Yeah.
we never pick up on any cues? And to my to my shock and also this was kind of a disappointing point for me. It's when I was looking back at this child's demeanor, I think that there were a few cues present. And if I was more observant and more intentional with, what I was looking for, of course, I give myself grace because I genuinely didn't know.
Right.
All right. But I think there's definitely some cues that would pop up, and this requires us to educate ourselves, of course, on these cues to be better able to recognize them. But this actually wasn't a male student. I know the direction of the conversation. We're trying to keep it focused on, males who've been sexually abused and so forth, and the whole topic regarding men. But it was a female student, and it was actually handled according to protocol, in my opinion. We went through the necessary channel after that information was brought to me. And I was still pretty young at that time. I think I was still 17.
Oh,
I don't think I'd turned 18 yet when I had to deal with that. Or I could be mistaken. No, I'm not. I was still 17. I hadn't turned 18 as yet. So it was kind of, it was a bit overwhelming to deal with, but I had the assistance and support of the welfare teacher along with the senior teachers that were required to be involved. Yeah. Only the teachers that were required to be involved were informed because we understand how sensitive the
yeah.
matter was. But it was held, it was handled, we followed protocol.
Right. And if you can you highlight some of those traits that that child might have projected that you didn't pick up? Just so a teacher who might have a student who might have been sexually abused can identify those traits and know or ask. Because sometimes children wouldn't just come to you and tell you. Well, of course, they have to trust you to come and tell you. But just so that they can, be aware.
Sure. Well, one of the things that looking back now and, with my knowledge now, is able to piece it all together. Um, in on a few occasions, noteworthy amount of occasions, she would often be disassociated from what's going on in classes. Um, and that it just struck me as, one of those things. Okay, she probably just bored by what's doing, because it's not something uncommon for teenagers to do. Because I
Probably an
mean,
introvert or something.
exactly.
Yeah.
And probably what I was saying just had no relevance to her at that point in time. So I just rule it off as that. In addition to that, though there wasn't a complete withdrawal from social interactions, I noticed that her social interactions were very limited. It's as though it was isolated to a select two other students, or sorry, three other students in the class. But that's also I remedied as, perhaps she's someone who's just selective with her friends and so on. But and I would like to highlight how I actually got this information. I was not directly approached. One of the initiatives I had in my class was every Thursday morning, because at my school we have a period assigned for pastoral care, where it gives the class teachers the opportunity to interact with the students, educate them on certain things, and personalize the lesson to however you want to do, like, go through affirmation exercises, whatever it is. You can do that in that time. So what I started doing was I had this, we call it a feelings box. So students, they would write anonymous notes and they drop it in. And during that pastoral care session, I would read what's written. And when I read it, it's to, I would try to get them to give advice, anonymously. So that person remains anonymous, but they're hearing
Advice. Yeah.
yes, and they're feeling the empathy of their classmates. And also I would share, and if it's something I'm able to contribute on. And a day whilst we were doing that activity, that is when I came across the note and I was reading it, and then I was made aware of it. Unfortunately, in the perpetrator of that heinous act, act, heinous act, it happened to be someone really close to her, extremely close. unfortunately. And that was, so I think that's definitely some of the things we need to look out for, the withdrawal in students, because sometimes it's not just that they're introverted. It could be something that is causing them to feel as though they need to isolate,
Yeah.
and perhaps making means available for them to anonymously communicate would
Mhm.
be a really good thing for other teachers to implement.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
And I know for sure that once you, with this anonymous, what do you call, with this pastoral care that you
Yeah.
had it not been for this, maybe, she could have continued being withdrawn and continued being alone, and maybe her case of sexual violence might have never been dealt with. Now, you said this, the process went through the child and it took the path it had to take. Do you think that enough is being done for victims of sexual abuse?
All right. So to okay, so I have to break that up into different parts, because there are there are at least two things I want to talk about under that. I want us to talk about it with regards to, well, in regards to boys for one,
Right.
and also with regards to the girls. I think that overall enough isn't being done, because within many traditional communities, and this is not to put traditional communities on blast or anything like that. But the fact of the matter is, it has become a norm to brush over acts of sexual abuse within families. I have heard so many stories of children, boys and girls alike, who would speak to their parents or another elder in their home that they trust about some act of sexual violence that was enacted on them, and then they're told that you're lying,
It's
or
not
or
true.
or, or if not, or if they're not lying, then they're told, okay, you maybe it wasn't, they minimize what happened to them
Yeah.
basically. And then even worse, what you find is that those victims are then forced to remain in the same environments with their abusers. I have a friend who um, was abused by someone really close to her, and she had to continue throughout her childhood, even in her adolescent years, up until the point where she was an adult, and then she moved out, living within the same yard with that person, even though her parents were aware of what happened to her. And I think that is not conducive for healing, because how can you heal if you are in an environment which just reminds you every
Yeah,
single day
it's
of
right in your face.
precisely? And
Mhm.
so all around, I think a lot needs to be done to sensitize people on not minimizing sexual abuse. We as a society should never accept sexual abuse as something that should be brushed under the mat or anything like that. It's a serious issue that has long-term effects on individuals. Trauma is one of those things that literally reconstructs the psyche of someone in the most extreme ways. So we
Yeah.
see so many broken people in our society. They do things that we can't understand, but if you actually take the time to learn about them and learn what they've gone through,
Something
then
is
it will
leading
put
up to
into
that.
that's correct. And so overall, I think a lot more needs to be done. And with regards to boys, I think little to no work has gone into tackling the issue of sexual abuse within among boys. Within the Caribbean, and sorry, let me not speak about the Caribbean. Let me speak about what I know. Within the Guyanese context. Now, and this is me going back to traditional society. It's like I'm putting the traditional people on blast here, but I'm not. I generally am not. But there are so many ridiculous narratives and views of what masculinity is that still exist. We know we
Yeah.
use the term toxic masculinity and stuff like that, and all of these things that exist. And to date, it's still a taboo topic for men to have feelings. So many people are still surprised when oh, when a man displays that he has emotions, if he cries, they don't know how to respond to that because it's still a taboo thing.
So
So
true.
if displaying the bare minimum, your emotions of sadness, if that is still considered a taboo, then that clearly shows that when it comes to more complex things like sexual abuse,
Mhm.
which can manifest in more violent and extreme, ways, I I don't think our society has done enough to prepare people to handle, um, but to just deal with that. And I understand that that is a, and I'm not blaming I'm not blaming anyone for that because I think it's a genuine lack of understanding. I
Uh-huh.
believe so. And I think even as men, we contribute to this, restrictive society existing where we cannot feel free to communicate about the actual problems we have and talk about the things that are impacting us. And then the men who have suffered sexual abuse, they are even more uncomfortable to talk about these things because of this rigid and so it's ridiculous social system that we've established. Where as a man, if you have been a victim of sexual abuse, that immediately reduces your value and diminishes your manhood. Because I believe that is a narrative that exists out there.
Yeah.
So many men they cannot come to terms with the fact that they've been abused because to acknowledge that would in turn mean that you acknowledge you're a victim. And then
Mhm.
to acknowledge you're a victim, that's the worst thing you can be as a man. Your man card immediately revoked. Yep,
Mhm.
who are you now? Yeah, and yeah, so I think a lot more needs to be done for boys because so many studies are being put out to highlight how, leading okay, with regards to suicide and so forth, we know that on an international level, men commit more suicides than women. Disproportionately more suicides are committed by men than women. And I think that tells us something. And if that isn't clear enough, that a safer space needs to be provided for boys and men, then I don't know what will.
Right. And the research has proven that 1 in every 20 boys are sexually abused. But that number might even be higher because a lot of men and boys do not know how to identify when they're sexually abused or sexually harassed. So that number can be higher, but a lot of men don't know when they're being sexually abused. Or, like you said, they just don't accept the fact that they're a victim because that might have them drop their man card, which is not true. So that takes us to our next question. What advice would you offer to boys who have been victims of sexual abuse?
So to the boys who have been victims of sexual abuse, the advice that I would give to them. No, okay, just I'm taking a few seconds to think of
That's
the
fine.
best answer here because there's a lot that you can say, but
Mhm.
okay, be be graceful with yourself. That's one. Um, I think we can all afford to be kind to ourselves, kind with ourselves as we heal and go through the different phases of life and so forth. And especially if it's something as extreme as sexual abuse, because what we need to understand is sexual abuse is not like any other form of abuse. It's easy for you to heal from a physical assault,
Yeah.
a verbal abuse, and so forth. But there is something heinous and twisted about sexual violence that leaves scars on an individual that unfortunately some people they go through their entire lifetime and are unable to even begin to address. So being graceful is definitely the advice I I think is worth giving to any male who's gone through who's been a victim of sexual abuse because and this isn't to say to push the narrative that okay men are being uh what should I say there's this narrative that because of feminism, it's like they're trying to demonize men.
Ah,
Yeah, but
yeah.
I don't want to push that narrative. But
Mhm.
but I think the fact is, generally being a man is like you get a lot of heat. It's like some people they look at you and they blame you for all the world's problems. Some
Right.
women generally they outright say that men are the root of all the problems in the world. They say the patriarchy, this, da 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 da, and it all comes down to okay, let's just blame men for everything.
Ah,
And there's merit to it, but uh, not all mankind is not a monolith. You can't blame all men. You can't paint everyone with one brush. There've been bad men and women in our history that did
right.
bad things to the world.
And that
But
actually ties
mhm,
into them knowing that it's not their fault.
that you know what that's actually a really great point there that you made up. That- Knowing that it's not your fault because that I think it's easy for someone who's been abused to fall into that cycle of blaming.
Yeah.
And I And I remember looking at a video once. It was one of those TED Talks, and that what they were talking about was abuse. And what the presenter mentioned is that because of all of the complex feelings that they
Mhm.
were experiencing and the genuine inability to process it, um, it it eventually led to them feeling as though what happened to them was their fault. Yeah. And then so yeah, that's definitely something that needs to be dismantled, that it's not your fault. You No one goes out looking to be sexually assaulted. So yeah, definitely getting boys and all persons who have been victims of sexual assault to understand that it's not your fault is a great way to start, and also let them know that they need to give themselves grace as they heal.
Mhm. Yeah. And just to wrap up our discussion today, I'd like to remind those who are watching that reporting cases of sexual abuse is definitely the way, and understanding that it's not your fault is definitely something you should do. And I'd like to thank you, Mr. Galloway, for your time today and for joining me on this conversation. And
It was my pleasure.
thank you. All right. You do take care. Anything else you'd like to leave with the viewers?
You know what? Sure. Um, it comes a point where after we have all of these discussions and so on, and people are, they're putting out information there, the individual, I think it falls upon us to to take up the responsibility to be better people, be better human beings, be kinder to people, because you really don't know what people are going through. Because on this topic in particular, a lot of people they keep their abuse silent, and
Yeah.
they mask it so well that you would never assume that they've been a victim of sexual abuse. So in our day-to-day interactions with the people around us, try to show up with an extra amount of love and care, especially for the people you claim are your friends and
Mm.
your family and loved ones. Show up with them with love, and hopefully when you shower them with that love, it can provide a space where they feel safe enough to actually talk about these things, begin addressing it, and that is pivotal for healing to begin.
So true.
Yeah.
All right. And that's so true. All right, Mr. Galloway, thank you so much for your time again and
So
for
it's my pleasure.
bringing your knowledge and for us having this very informative discussion. All right. Thank you.
Honored. Thanks.
Take care.